It had been seized, taken by investigators, sitting in police custody, behind gates, behind locks, behind a chain of evidence that was supposed to be unbreakable. And yet, according to reports, something inside that car had changed. That single detail stopped people cold, not just because of what it suggested, but because of what it revealed about how far someone might go when the walls begin closing in. Because if evidence can be tampered with while it is already in the hands of law enforcement, then something has gone deeply, fundamentally wrong, either with the person accused of doing it or with the system designed to prevent it. Nancy Guthrie was a woman known for something entirely different. She was known for faith, for grief, for standing in front of thousands of people and speaking honestly about the most painful corners of her own life. She lost a child, then she lost another, and still she stood. She wrote. She guided people through seasons of sorrow that most people could not imagine surviving. Her name carried weight. It carried meaning. And then her son-in-law became the center of an investigation that almost no one in her world saw coming. The accusations were serious. The circumstances were strange, and the question of how someone could allegedly tamper with evidence, while that evidence was already in custody, that question didn't just point to wrongdoing. It pointed to something more deliberate, something colder. This is the story that began quietly and refused to stay that way. There's a particular kind of pain that comes not from losing something, but from watching something you believed in begin to unravel. It is slower than grief. It is quieter. And in many ways, it cuts deeper because it doesn't announce itself. It just settles in and stays. Nancy Guthrie had built her life on a foundation that most people only claim to want: deep faith, authentic community, a purpose that grew directly from personal suffering. She and her husband David had faced the kind of loss that breaks families apart. They had lost their daughter Hope, who lived only 199 days. Then, years later, they lost their son Gabriel, who lived only 183 days. Both children were born with Zellweger syndrome, a rare and fatal condition that offered no path forward, only time, and then goodbye. Most people, after that kind of devastation, retreat. They survive quietly. They allow the grief to become a private wound that they carry without speaking of it. Nancy didn't do that. She wrote about it. She spoke about it openly, honestly, without softening the edges. She turned her family's deepest sorrow into a ministry that reached people across the country and eventually round the world. She hosted a podcast. She led grief retreats. She sat across from people who had just buried their own children and told them, in her own steady voice, that there was still something worth holding on to. Her credibility wasn't manufactured. It was earned through devastation, and it was exactly that credibility, that carefully lived, deeply felt public identity, that made what came next feel so jarring to the people who followed her. Her son-in-law, whose name began appearing in connection with a criminal investigation, was not a stranger in that world. He was woven into the fabric of the community that had grown around Nancy's work and her name. And when investigators began looking at him, they weren't simply looking at one man. They were pulling at a thread that ran through an entire network of people who had trusted the world he was part of. The initial allegations were troubling enough on their own. But then came the detail about the car. The vehicle in question had already been seized. It was, by every standard legal definition, out of reach, in the custody of law enforcement, sitting inside a controlled environment where the chain of custody was supposed to be maintained with absolute, unquestionable care. According to reports, questions were raised about whether something inside that car had been altered or accessed after it had already been taken in. That detail changed the shape of everything, because tampering with evidence already in police possession is not a panic mistake made in a moment of fear. It suggests planning. It suggests access. It suggests either a catastrophic failure somewhere inside the system, or something far more deliberate on the part of someone who had very specific reasons to be afraid of what that car might reveal. Before any of this, there was an ordinary life, or at least something that looked like one from the outside. Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law, whose situation has been the subject of ongoing legal proceedings, was, by most accounts, embedded in a world that appeared stable. He was connected to a family with a public presence, a respected name. and deep roots in a tight-knit faith community. The life surrounding him was built on the idea of finding meaning through suffering, of purpose discovered even in the hardest places. That kind of environment tends to draw in people who are genuine, people who are sincerely searching for something better, something real. But sometimes it also draws in people who simply understand how to wear the right face in the right room. What was actually happening beneath the surface of this man's life before investigators became involved remains, in many ways, unclear. No official final conclusion has been reached on every aspect of the case. But what has emerged is a picture of someone who appeared to those around him to be living within a framework of faith and accountability, while questions have since been raised about what was happening in the private margins of that life, away from the people who trusted him. That dissonance between the face someone presents and the reality they conceal is one of the most psychologically unsettling elements of any story like this. And the reason it stings so particularly here is that the people closest to him were not naive. They had organized their entire lives around the idea of facing hard things honestly. The thought that something was being hidden inside that community, inside that family, would have felt, to many of them, like a second kind of loss. Not the sudden kind, not the kind that arrives with a phone call in the middle of the night, but the slow, eroding kind. The kind where you look back at moments you once trusted and begin asking, quietly and painfully, whether any of it was real. The moment an investigation becomes public, everything changes. Before that moment, there's private suspicion, quiet concern, careful conversations in rooms most people never see, the slow accumulation of information that hasn't yet been given a name. After that moment, there are names attached to allegations. There are records. There's a paper trail that, once it exists, cannot be walked back. According to reports, investigators began looking into Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law in connection with allegations that were serious in nature. The details of those initial allegations have been documented in public legal records, and they pointed to conduct that, if confirmed, would represent a significant betrayal, not just of legal limits, but of the trust embedded in every relationship around him. For Nancy Guthrie, who had spent years speaking publicly about the importance of integrity and transparency in the middle of suffering, the emergence of an investigation this close to home must have carried a particular weight. There's no way to fully know what that experience felt like from the inside, and it would be wrong to pretend otherwise. But those who have followed her for years know that she has never been someone who hid from difficulty. Still, this was different. This wasn't grief she could shape into a lesson. This wasn't pain she could invite others into on her own terms. This was something unfolding in real time, involving someone she knew, someone tied to her family, and playing out in a very public way. The community around her noticed. Questions circulated online and in private conversations. People who had drawn strength from her words now found themselves sitting with an uncomfortable silence, waiting to understand what this meant and how much further the story was going to go. And then came the detail that no one quite expected. The car, already seized, already in custody, reportedly became the subject of allegations involving evidence tampering. That didn't just add another layer to the case. It lifted the entire situation into something that investigators, legal observers, and ordinary people following the story found genuinely difficult to explain away. How does evidence get tampered with while it's already inside a police facility? That is the question that hung over this case like something unresolved, because there is no clean, comfortable answer to it. The very premise challenges the foundational assumptions of how evidence is supposed to be protected. When a vehicle is seized as part of a criminal investigation, it enters a controlled chain of custody. There are logs and locks. There are protocols built specifically to prevent unauthorized access. The entire purpose of that system is to guarantee that what investigators find inside a piece of evidence reflects exactly what was there when the item was first taken, not what someone decided it should look like afterward. For evidence tampering to allegedly occur inside that system, something significant would have to go wrong. Either the system failed in a way that allowed unauthorized access, which would raise serious and troubling questions about the integrity of the Investigation itself, or someone found a way around those protections that was deliberate, calculated, and executed with enough precision to at least partially succeed. According to reports and public legal filings, the allegations in this case lean toward the latter. Investigators have indicated, based on available information, that the alleged tampering was not a matter of confusion or accident. The framing of the accusations points to intentionality. It suggests that whoever was implicated in this aspect of the case understood exactly what they were doing and made a conscious choice to do it anyway. That places it in an entirely different category from acting impulsively out of panic. It points to someone who, even after a criminal investigation had been set in motion, even after the car had been taken, the clock had started, and the consequences were becoming real, still believed they could change the outcome, still believed they had some control over what would be found, what would be proven, what the story would ultimately say. That kind of thinking, that even inside a legal process, the rules remain somehow negotiable, says something profound about the psychological state of the person involved, and it deepened the case considerably. There's a cost to all of this that never appears in court documents. When someone inside a trusted community is accused of serious wrongdoing, and when those accusations include allegations of actively trying to obstruct justice, the people surrounding that person don't simply lose trust in him. Something quieter happens. They begin, often without fully realizing it, to question their own judgment, their own perception, the reliability of the environment they thought they understood. For the people who had gathered around Nancy Guthrie's work, who had attended her events, read her books, listened to her voice on long drives or difficult mornings, this story carried a particular kind of sting, because everything she had built was grounded in a single honest idea, that facing the truth about pain, rather than hiding from it, is the only path through, that there are no shortcuts through grief, that the only way to reach the other side is to walk straight through the middle of it, without pretending the darkness isn't there. If someone close to her, someone inside that family, had been hiding something serious, and had allegedly been not just doing wrong but actively trying to cover it up, then that message would have felt compromised to some people. Not because Nancy herself was accused of anything. She wasn't, but because proximity matters, because the credibility of a message is tied, fairly or not, to the people standing closest to the person delivering it. None of that is entirely rational, but grief and betrayal rarely are. According to those close to the situation, Nancy continued to operate with composure throughout this period. She did not disappear. She did not issue dramatic public statements designed to deflect or redirect attention. She moved, as she had always moved, with a quiet steadiness that suggested she understood something important about how fragile trust is and how quickly it can be destroyed by the wrong word, at the wrong moment. That restraint, in its own way, said everything. By the time the full shape of the allegations had become clearer, the case had stopped being a simple story, if it ever was one. It wasn't just about one man accused of a crime. It was about the specific nature of what he was accused of, evidence tampering, allegedly, while that evidence was already in the custody of law enforcement, and what that implied about his state of mind, his access, the lengths he was apparently willing to go. It was about a community built on transparency being forced to reckon with the possibility that someone at its edges had been operating in the dark. It was about Nancy Guthrie, a woman who never asked for any of this, who had built something real over years of genuine suffering, and who now found her name attached to a story she did not write and could not fully control. No official final conclusion has been reached on every element of this case. Legal proceedings take time. Allegations must be proven through evidence, through testimony, through a process that cannot and should not be rushed. And in a case with this many moving parts, the original charges, the evidence tampering allegations, the unresolved question of how that tampering could have occurred at all, the full picture is still slowly forming. But what has already been established is enough to raise serious questions about what happened, about who knew what and when, about how someone embedded in a community defined by honesty could allegedly be engaged in something so deliberately deceptive, and perhaps most of all, about the car. That car, seized, locked away, sitting inside a system designed to protect the truth, became, in a way, the symbol of something larger in this entire story. It represented the idea that even when the evidence is out of your hands, some people still believe they can reach it, still believe the narrative is something they can rewrite. Sometimes they're wrong. There is something quietly devastating about watching trust break in slow motion, not the sudden kind of loss, the kind that arrives without warning and demands an immediate response, but the kind that unfolds over days and weeks and months, as new information surfaces and old assumptions fall quietly away, and you find yourself standing in a landscape that looks familiar but no longer feels like it belongs to you. Nancy Guthrie has spent much of her adult life talking about exactly that feeling, about the way grief reshapes the world around you without asking permission, about how the people who come out the other side of real loss are not the same people who entered it, and why that transformation, painful as it is, might actually be the whole point. She never claimed that faith makes hard things easy. She was always very clear about that. She said, consistently and publicly, that trusting something larger than yourself doesn't protect you from pain. It simply means you don't have to carry it entirely alone. Whatever she has carried during this particular chapter, and whatever she continues to carry, as this case moves through the legal system, she has done so, at least from what is publicly visible, with the same quiet steadiness that has always defined her. That matters, not because it resolves anything, or simplifies anything, or makes the situation less complicated than it is, but because, in a story full of unanswered questions, the consistency of one person's character is itself a kind of answer. The case involving her son-in-law will continue to unfold. There will be more hearings, more filings, more documents entered into the public record. The question of how evidence was allegedly accessed while already in custody may yet be answered more fully as the legal process runs its course. But some things will remain, regardless of how the proceedings ultimately conclude. The community that formed around Nancy's work will have to decide what this means for them going forward. The people who drew comfort from her message will have to sit with the complexity of finding that message in close proximity to something deeply troubling. And Nancy herself, who has buried children, who has stood in rooms full of people at the very edge of despair and offered them something real and lasting, will carry this too. She will add it to the weight she already knows how to hold. Not because it is easy, not because it is fair, but because it is, as she has always said about the hardest things in life, simply what you do. You keep going, even when the story is not the one you chose. If this story made you stop and think about truth, about trust, about the distance between who we appear to be and who we actually are, take a moment and leave your thoughts in the comments below. These kinds of stories don't have easy answers, and sometimes the most honest thing any of us can do is simply sit with that. If you found value in how this was told, consider subscribing. There are more stories here, each one told with the same care and the same commitment to asking the questions that matter. We're building something real, and we'd be glad to have you with us.